Chapter 151 A Mage Opponent. Just as Brian had said, judging someone based on their aura was a risky thing to do. Michael understood this better than anyone. After all, he was a necromancer. Though he didn't think his aura would be outright repulsive to other supernaturals with keen senses, he figured it would stand out a bit. However, it probably wouldn't be too conspicuous since he hadn't involved himself in the kind of filthy practices a certain group indulged in. Read new adventures at my virtual library empire. Still, whether it was due to his class or simply a natural progression of strength, Michael had developed an acute sensitivity to certain energies. He could now distinguish between a regular supernatural and a demonic one, at least, as long as they weren't using aura concealment techniques and were not far stronger than him. Otherwise, his senses would be useless. This time, Michael was certain he had finally caught a fish. However, whether it was a big one or not remained to be seen. The community was eerily quiet, its ruins scattered with monster and human corpses, though in noticeably lower numbers than in other places he had visited. It seemed that any survivors had already been transported elsewhere. Yet, as he passed a particular building, Michael felt a surge of ominous negative energy. What was strange, however, was that while his senses clearly detected the presence of such energy, he couldn't pick up any signs of life. Such impressive concealment. That was the only thought that crossed his mind. Unfortunately for the hidden individual, some energies coating them weren't as easy to suppress. Their cries. Michael wasn't sure he should call them that. He could hear them. At the very least, this suggested that the other party wasn't strong enough to completely erase everything from Michael's perception. Even so, Michael wasn't about to take any chances. As for whether there was a living person behind that wall, at that moment, the thought didn't even cross his mind. However, it seemed that the moment Michael paused, the other party had noticed. However, it seemed they weren't willing to take any chances. Just as Michael got ready to summon Prince, while also wanting to order the Tamil RC Undead by his side to get ready, the wall of the building he had his eyes on burst open. Immediately, a figure in black appeared right on the street and started running. Slokers. Michael's mind reacted immediately, and he cast a skill on the figure. The feedback he felt immediately allowed him to know that he had underestimated a bit. The demonic supernatural. This one. It was a powerful one. Just as Slokers struggled to hold the fugitive, Michael was already casting another spell. Undead summoning. Immediately, a huge magic circle appeared in front of him, and the figure of a wolf started emerging from it at a rapid speed. At the same time, Michael mentally commanded the two orcs beside him to rush at the figure. All this happened in a flash, yet the figure was also able to react. Michael watched as they cast a spell, even while semi-motionless. A magic circle appeared right beneath their feet, and an earth dome formed against them. Bam! The two hammer-wielding orcs sent a string of attacks at the dome, causing dust to fly everywhere. Suddenly, Michael's expression twitched. "Come back!" As he screamed the command while sending it to the two orcs mentally, Michael watched as the magic circle appeared in midair above the dome, and a huge fire spear shot out from them. Unfortunately, the orcs had just started retreating when the fire spears appeared in front of them. Fortunately, their instincts kicked in, and their bodies moved to strike their hammers at the fire spears. Boom! An explosion echoed as the two undead flew past Michael due to the shockwave. In a matter of 2 seconds, a few blows had already been exchanged, and from them, Michael immediately realized that he had encountered not only a strong opponent, but one with good battle experience. However, Michael didn't give up or retreat immediately. He might be lacking in experience, but not in firepower. Avu, Prince, who had already emerged from the netherworld, wasted no time in attacking immediately. Thick vines erupted from the ground and charged at the earth dome ahead when it suddenly broke off, revealing the figure in black and a huge red magic circle in front of them. Michael didn't need to know what it was. He sensed a huge threat from it, and that was enough. Leaving Prince to deal with the situation however he liked, Michael immediately dashed away from the place. And just as he had expected, the magic circle was indeed bad news. A wide stream of hot flames appeared from the magic circle, charging at Prince, who immediately set up a wine wall around itself. Unfortunately, plants just happened to be the worst counter for fire. It only fueled the flames more. However, it still did its work of stopping the flames. Unfortunately, the magic circle didn't seem to be a stagnant one. For the first time, Michael was able to see what a cultivator could do if they went all out in a residential space in a fight. It was destructive. In just a few seconds, flames filled the whole area. One could only imagine how it would have been if people had actually been around. Perhaps they were some, in fact not. These were not within Michael and his opponent's current considerations. The moment the magic on the magic circle ran out was the moment Michael was able to strike back. Well, not him exactly, but his undead. At this point, Michael realized that it was a mage he was up against. Really, the firepower that they could output was a lot. No wonder they were even considered rare in the class classification system. Even in the cultivator power system, Michael hadn't met a lot of mages. However, while powerful, Michael knew that mages had one great weakness: their physique. It was weak. Just as the magic circle that caused a stream of fire disappeared, and another one started to appear, the shadow of Prince appeared right behind the mage, and with a claw, it sent the mage flying. Bam! 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 The mage flew through multiple buildings in a flash. Not willing to give their opponent a moment's rest, Michael and his undead chased after the figure. A moment later, they found the mage trying to get up from the ground with their body trembling a lot. Obviously, Michael wasn't going to allow this to happen. With a mental command, he ordered Prince to strike again. On the roof of a building, Michael also made a move. However, it seemed that while his actions were right, they had still given the mage enough time. Two magic circles appeared around the mage. Strangely, the two weren't directed at Prince's flashing figure, with one directed at Michael's location. Shit! Michael didn't even think about it and immediately dashed to another location. Unfortunately, though the mage had managed in stopping Michael from casting a spell, it was too much to think a single attack spell could hold Prince in place. Bam! Out of sight from Michael's eyes, who due to his haste had blasted himself into a building, Prince with its huge claw slammed the body of the mage to the ground. With the body of the mage, a crater formed on the ground. However, the mage still had a bit of life in them. It was evident from the event that even as a mage, though they had the weakest physique among most professions, they were still strong and had great vitality. However, all these had no business to do with Prince. Wasting no time, Prince gave another claw attack. Bam! The crater in the ground got a bit deeper. Bam! Yet another attack. Bam! Yet another attack to the mage on the ground. Just as it was about to deliver another attack to finally end the life of the mage, a sudden scream echoed. Stop! Prince's attack halted immediately. From a certain building, Michael shot up and charged at the mage's body on the ground. Finally close, a spear materialized in his hand, and without hesitation, he struck down. You have killed a... Michael didn't even turn to look at the notifications that appeared nor reflect on what he had just done and immediately placed the body in his storage space. Dismissing all his undead, he immediately charged out of the location. A few seconds later, a few figures appeared in the sky. Chapter 152 Trash Alive. One might imagine that a battle between figures akin to gods, in the eyes of ordinary humans, would be a long and devastating clash. Devastating. Yes. Long. Only if both sides were evenly matched. In a fight where power was unequal from the very start, even a god could fall in an instant. Of course, the force capable of erasing such a being in the blink of an eye had to be just as terrifying. Had the battle between the mage and Michael been a one-on-one duel, Michael would have lost easily. Battle experience. A vast arsenal of spells. Michael had none of these, at least, not compared to that mage. However, a one-on-one fight was never an option for Michael. He was a necromancer. I think this is far enough, Michael muttered, scanning his surroundings. It was another ruined community, much like the rest of the city. Through his senses, he picked up faint signs of life around. The association had likely done what they could here before moving on, for now. But for Michael, this place was far enough. Sitting atop a rooftop, he took a deep breath, calming himself. Cultivators are strong, he mused. In spellcasting, at least, that mage had been far ahead of him. But Michael didn't feel discouraged. He had only been a supernatural for barely a week. Now that he thought about it, he had come far, and fast. Just when he thought he was moving just slowly, his gaze swept over the ruins around him. So many things have happened in just a few days. A strange emotion stirred within him, but he pushed it aside. He had gotten what he wanted. Now, it was time to return to his community before someone else arrived first, and they ran into trouble with his undead, or vice versa. As for the result of his battle with the mage, that could wait. As for taking a human life for the first time, Michael didn't even think about it. Maybe it was because he had already killed too much in a short span, today and in the past few days. Maybe he had grown numb to it. Or maybe he was just coping. Only Michael would know. But just as he was about to leave, he felt movement from within the building beneath him. 4 people. That's a lot. Lucky people. Michael merely thought to himself. But just as he was about to move, he paused. A faint wail seemed to whisper to him. Slowly, Michael lowered himself on the building below, his expressionless eyes flashing for a brief moment. A second later, an airy butterfly appeared beside him, fluttering around as a mist began to rise. Undead Phantom Morpho LV2. Illusory Mirage O. Basic Mastery. Proficiency. 6.7%. Creates multiple, shimmering duplicates of itself to confuse enemies. At Basic Mastery, the illusions move erratically but fade upon contact, making it harder for foes to pinpoint the real creature. Mist. No. The power of illusion slowly enveloped the building beneath Michael. In the apartment building, the 4 men who had initially started with corpses to themselves prepared to move out. As for how things ended up that way, they couldn't quite tell. All they knew was that something within them had urged them to act, whispering that what they were doing was right, pleasurable, even. It wasn't that they hadn't done it before, but never in a situation as serious as this. Yet they felt an irresistible urge to unearth even deeper desires. Even now, the urge to cause more chaos simmered within them, but the pressing need to escape the city forced them to suppress their bloodlust. If Michael knew about this, he would attribute it to the cracks. As he had suspected, if the only thing the cracks did was release monsters, then in a certain way, it wasn't the worst possible outcome. Continue reading on my virtual library empire. Unfortunately, from the ghosts he had encountered, it was clear that something even stranger was happening in the city. Being influenced by the chaotic energy in the air seemed very plausible. When did the fog appear? One of the men cautiously opened the entrance door, only to be met with a thick, swirling mist that obscured almost everything beyond. The others behind him also noticed the change, their expressions turning serious. "Close the door," one of them stated as another moved toward a window to check outside. Was this window always open? He briefly wondered but quickly dismissed the thought. Just like the scene at the entrance, the outside was shrouded in fog. Is something weird happening again? The man muttered worriedly, unaware of the glowing green eyes that had appeared behind him. Wait. The fog is getting inside. He noticed the mist creeping into the gaps and immediately shut the window, but it made no difference. The fog only grew denser. Just as he turned to speak, his body suddenly stiffened. Confusion flashed across his face as he struggled to move. Then, he felt a cold hand wrap around his neck. A moment later, his neck snapped. As his vision darkened, the last thing he heard was a voice, deep and enigmatic, yet strangely youthful. Trash alive. You'll make an excellent undead. Michael stared at the lifeless body in his grip, his expression unreadable. Now that he had a moment to reflect, he finally thought about his actions. Yet, even as he did, he felt nothing. No guilt. No hesitation. If anything, he felt a little excited. Such fragility. It gave him an intoxicating sense of power. However, Michael didn't allow himself to get lost in the feeling. Old Man Liu and Teacher Brian were right. Killing a lot in a short span really messes you up. He understood the gravity of it. But understanding didn't mean he could change what had happened. At least, not right now. It wasn't as if he was killing for the sake of it. Who are you? Michael heard a voice behind him and turned, letting the body in his grasp drop to the floor. He had snuck into the building to uncover what was happening without revealing his identity, just in case he was wrong. But he wasn't. The moment he struck down his target, he was ready to face the remaining three. Michael didn't answer the question. He sighed and vanished from his spot. Chapter 153 Return. The reason Michael left immediately after defeating the mage was that he knew there was a chance the battle would draw the attention of the association members. He didn't think he'd be in trouble for fighting a demonic supernatural, but he doubted he'd be allowed to take the corpse himself. What he didn't know was that, shortly after he left, two figures appeared midair at the battle site. Rank 4 cultivators. The two arrivals were both men. They scanned the surroundings before one of them spoke. There are multiple energy signatures here. It's chaotic, but the dominant ones are fire and wood. Should we track the lingering traces? I can sense dark energy as well, though faint. There's no need to waste time. The demonic supernaturals wouldn't dare cause too much havoc. Though I don't know why one fought here. It's not our concern. Our priority is restoring order to the city. If we don't do something about the chaotic energy in time, things will only spiral further. Agreed. With that, the two men ended their discussion. Rather than chase after a fleeing demonic supernatural, it was far more important to stabilize the situation. If their negligence led to a disaster requiring a king-rank expert's intervention, there would be nothing they could do, even as some of the strongest cultivators below the king level in Woodstone City. Having made their decision, they immediately flew off in another direction. Of course, things would have been different had they seen Michael, but they didn't care enough to track down a vague trail. Back at Michael's location moments later, unlike when he had used slokers on the first man, Michael didn't bother doing the same for the remaining three. All were given swift deaths. A single, precise strike to the back of the neck. After finishing off the last one, Michael paused briefly before storing the 4 bodies in his storage space, recalling his undead phantom morpho as well. Though he felt a moment of unexpected discomfort, it quickly faded, replaced by growing excitement. Initially, he had worried that due to the Supers Association intervening, preventing him from obtaining a demonic supernatural's corpse, he'd return home empty-handed. Yet not only had he secured the body of a strong supernatural, he had also acquired 4 ordinary corpses. Michael was quite satisfied with the outcome. Of course, he wished he could revive one immediately and begin the process of evolving it, but he wasn't in the right situation to indulge in such desires. The city was still unstable, and he had a community to protect. Besides, though physically unharmed, he was mentally exhausted. Some proper rest wouldn't be a bad idea. Just as he was about to leave, a series of notifications appeared before him, a familiar sight. You have brought peace to a common, level 3 lingering ghost. You have gained 33 experience points. You have brought peace to a common, level 4 lingering ghost. You have gained 38 experience points. Michael didn't need to think twice to understand which ghosts he had helped pass on. His gaze shifted to the couple's bodies on the ground. After a moment of contemplation, he walked through the house and retrieved a blanket. Just as he had done for the mother and daughter back in his apartment, Michael covered the couple's bodies as well. Unlike before, this didn't cause a further drop in negative energy. It had already been diminishing from the moment the ghosts had been put to rest. Necromancer. Necromancy. There's still a lot I don't understand, he muttered. But that was fine. Michael loved that he had things to look forward to. Whatever. Let's get back home. With that, he stepped out of the building, greeted by a slightly brighter atmosphere. After a long night of fighting, it seemed the sun was finally preparing to rise over this ruined city. As Michael flashed from his spot, moments later, high in the sky, a group of people emerged from the crack. Though they tried to contain it, their aura still leaked, causing the space around them to tremble. It was evident who these people were. The Kingring cultivators sent to resolve the level 5 cracks in Woodstone City. However, these supposedly dignified figures looked like a mess. Stay updated through my virtual library empire. Setting aside their strange armor and weapons, most were drenched in blood, some from the monsters they had battled within the cracks, and some their own. One had even lost an arm, yet his expression remained indifferent, as if such an injury was trivial. Among them, only a few remained relatively unscathed, aside from exhaustion. One was Quietblade. The other, both an expected and unexpected presence, was Brian, the newly ascended Kingring cultivator, the Mad Phoenix. Though he was grouped alongside Quietblade, it wasn't due to lack of contribution he was unscratched. On the contrary, he had shown faint signs of matching the strongest among them. The gazes directed at him were now more serious, caution, respect, and something else. Yet, Brian himself seemed unconcerned with their stares. Sensing the crack he had just exited and those still remaining, he spoke. We've cleared a third of each crack twice. Though we are close to completely clearing these artificial cracks, we have to admit we are in no condition to continue, unless we are ready to lose one or more of our own. The other kings remained silent, but their expressions showed agreement. Right on cue, Quietblade added. A lot is bound to change after this, but for now, let's return and rest. With the cracks in their current state, we can't afford to delay clearing them. Chapter 154 Report. The Kingring cultivators retreated to recover wherever they could. As they had decided, it wasn't too late to resume clearing the cracks since the immediate danger had been dealt with. They could afford to take their time. Pushing themselves beyond their limits now would only increase the risk of death, a risk none of them were willing to take. No matter how precious the rewards were, they weren't worth the centuries of life they still had ahead of them. One by one, the Kingring cultivators left. Brian also flashed back to the Supers Association, but instead of making his presence known, he teleported straight into the office of the people in charge. At that moment, the branch manager of the Supers Association and Deputy Manager Leo were deep in discussion about the current state of the city. The situation isn't looking good, Deputy Manager Leo stated grimly. The branch manager, a mid-rank rank 4 knight, and Leo, a late-stage rank 3 knight, were among the most powerful figures in Woodstone City, especially now, after the chaos had claimed even some of the city's strongest defenders. Though not the most powerful, Deputy Manager Leo's organizational skills were unmatched. There were stronger individuals who could take his position, but very few who could handle it as efficiently as he did. And while Aurora was a world where strength reigned supreme, talent and leadership couldn't be ignored. And Leo was far from weak. Just tell me how bad it is, the branch manager sighed, rubbing his temples in exhaustion. And sit down, will you? Watching you stand there is making me dizzy. Leo hesitated. He wasn't used to sitting in front of his superiors. But after a brief moment of consideration, he took the seat opposite the manager. Even for him, the night's events had been exhausting. Just as Deputy Manager Leo was about to speak, a figure suddenly appeared in the office, startling both him and the branch manager. Your journey continues with my virtual library empire. Their instincts kicked in immediately, but before they could react, an overwhelming pressure crashed down on them. Their bodies refused to move. A suffocating weight bore down on their shoulders, leaving them frozen in place, sweat trickling down their backs as they stared in awe. You two should relax. I'm just here to talk, Brian said calmly, withdrawing the oppressive force he had released. Sorry about that, by the way. It's okay, Your Honor, the branch manager quickly responded, forcing a polite smile. Deputy Manager Leo nodded stiffly in agreement. Starting from the 4th rank of cultivation, the master rank, cultivators were given titles of respect. Back when Brian was still a master and cultivator, he had been addressed as Master Brian, a sign of both recognition and respect. Now that he had stepped into the king rank, he was referred to as Your Honor. At emperor rank, he would be called Your Highness. And at demigod rank, he would earn the title of Lord. At a certain point, even the Federation, which had tried its best not to create a strength-based hierarchy, had to acknowledge the inevitable reality. Power alone dictated status. Seeing that Deputy Manager Leo was about to stand up and offer his seat, Brian immediately spoke to stop him. There's no need for you to stand up, he said. Just tell me the current state of the city. Deputy Manager Leo didn't like the idea of sitting while the other party stood, but he could tell from Brian's tone that his words were absolute. Respecting the decision, he did not argue. However, he also chose not to sit. Instead, he remained standing to address Brian. Seeing this, the branch manager, who had originally planned to remain seated, felt uncomfortable. In the end, he stood as well. Brian noticed their actions but couldn't be bothered to care about them. His focus was on the report. The city is in a dire state, Deputy Manager Leo began. The population has dropped by a staggering 45%, and it's estimated to decline even further due to the lack of proper medical care. Fortunately, the branch manager of the other branch can perform healing arts, but her spells are only rank 1. After fighting for so long, she is reaching her limit. However, based on estimates, she can still save around 20% of the expected casualties. He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. Then, he continued. The next issue, one just as concerning as the cracks in the sky, is the chaotic energy spreading through the city. Due to its influence, people are becoming more prone to negative actions. Those who engage in violence or crime feel an even stronger urge to continue. So far, it hasn't affected supernaturals, but its presence still causes serious issues. While the energy is gradually dissipating, thanks to Your Honor and the other king rank cultivators, it still lingers, and we fear it may breed something unnatural. Leo took another breath before delivering the next grim report. We've also lost a significant number of supernaturals. Based on our data and additional reports from the other branch, we've lost at least half of the registered supernaturals. Most of the casualties are rank 2 elite cultivators and below. We've also lost a few commander rank supernaturals. Master rank casualties are minimal. Leo's voice grew heavier. Also, due to the reversal of the level 5 cracks, they are now permanent. Unlike before, when these cracks would eventually disappear, they are now as stable as natural cracks. This means they will never disappear. Because of this, we may have no choice but to evacuate the entire city. It's one thing to have cracks hidden away, but it's another to see them every day, looming over us. And beyond that, the city itself is simply too damaged to remain livable. There was a reason why cracks were usually sealed within specialized containers. Unfortunately, level 5 cracks had already surpassed what most containers could handle. Though the cracks wouldn't break now, or for a very long time, for several reasons, this level of crack weren't exactly the best places to live near for ordinary humans. And that was just from the perspective of supernaturals. Only the surviving government officials truly understood how devastating the situation was for the general public as a whole. Chapter 155. Moving ahead. Brian and the branch manager continued listening to Deputy Manager Leo's report, which seemed to contain more bad news than good. After he finished, silence filled the room for a moment. Brian finally spoke. "We've done what we could and can only do what we can. As for the city's evacuation, that isn't something that can happen in a day or two, so there's no point in overthinking it. I'll find someone capable of completely isolating the cracks. If the method is strong enough, evacuation may not be necessary, but that's for the city government to decide. In the meantime, investigate any clues regarding the demon's involvement in this. The fact that similar incidents occurred in other cities, though rarely as severe as ours, marks the first time in a long while that a top race has directly attacked our realm." Brian sighed. "I'm exhausted. We'll talk later." With that, he disappeared, leaving the two managers in silence. A few seconds later, Deputy Manager Leo couldn't hold back his thoughts. "Branch Manager, do you think we are heading into another race war? Has it ever ended? Experience tales at my virtual library empire." "Ah, that's true. I understand what you mean, though," the branch manager continued. "This is one of the few times in a long while that a top race has openly, well though indirectly, attacked us. If war truly breaks out against a race of this level, it will be nothing like the battles we've fought before with weaker races." Deputy Manager Leo remained silent, absorbing the weight of his superior's words. The branch manager finally sighed. "In the grand scheme of things, only the strongest decide the fate of a realm." "True," Leo agreed. Back in his community, Michael summoned his undead back into the real world, reinforcing the forces he had left behind to continue clearing the area. He then freed the people sheltered inside the wine domes he had created for their protection. Afterward, he handed the potions he had brought to his neighbor, the one with the rude nephew, so they could be used to heal the injured and provide some relief from the pain. Though the man was a supernatural, Michael still took the time to explain how to use the health potions properly, detailing their potency and effects. Fortunately, no one had died. That meant Michael never had to find out whether he would have felt guilty for not acting sooner. After all, he should have done this before leaving the community again for the second time, right after resolving the issue in his apartment building and with that neighbor. Now, a semblance of peace and order filled the blood-soaked streets. With his sharp hearing, Michael occasionally picked up the sound of sobs from various people, regardless of age or gender, but since they weren't his family, he didn't care. With his mind at ease, he finally took the time to bathe and clean himself. By the time he was done, dawn had arrived, and daylight had brightened the city outside. Changing into a set of clothes that felt noticeably tighter on him, Michael sat on the chair in his room and pulled up the notifications, the ones he had received after killing his first supernatural and the 4 humans. However, something about the notifications seemed strange. There were no stars. "You have killed a level 25 Aurora human mage. You have gained 2,855 EXP. You killed 5 levels higher than your own, earning a 6x experience multiplier. You have gained 17,130 EXP. You have killed a level 9 Aurora human knight apprentice. Times 4. You have gained EXP. There were no stars. Additionally, a title appeared beside the human's name, as if it was used to differentiate a race. Michael wasn't unfamiliar with the concept of races, But looking at the notification before him, it seemed that the humans here weren't just a singular group, but rather a distinct branch, categorized separately despite being human. He immediately had the urge to test Undead Revival on one of the corpses, but forced himself to stay calm. Why didn't humans have stars? What did that mean for his talent? What conditions needed to be met for a being to receive no stars? Did the absence of stars signify that humans in this realm had no potential limit, that as long as they had the opportunity, they could continue advancing indefinitely? Michael briefly considered whether this was the same for other races, but since he hadn't encountered one yet, the thought was short-lived. Things are getting interesting. Haha. The words slipped out before he realized it, excitement bubbling to the surface as he got lost in thought. He quickly composed himself, dismissing the panels in front of him. Now, he needed to decide what to do next. First and foremost, his family. Now that his mind was clearer, a chill ran down his spine. Had he not awakened, had he not taken leveling up and evolving his undead seriously, he could have lost his family. He could have lost his own life. He had been lucky to have enough strength, but this incident made him crave even more power. It also made him realize how vulnerable his family was. As much as he wanted to avoid the thought, his mind moved too fast to ignore the reality. There were things beyond his control. Something tragic could happen to his family, and no matter what, he wouldn't be able to blame himself. Yet deep down, he knew he still would. That was why he wanted to give his family power. The fastest way would be to use his talent on them, but that would require them to die first. Michael froze at the thought. How did that idea even cross my mind? Shaking his head, he considered other options. One thing was certain. He no longer wanted to live in Woodstone City. This incident was the perfect excuse to leave. Before he awakened, Michael had always wanted to see more of the world beyond what was shown on the internet, the hologram technology, the hover cars, the wonders of civilization. Woodstone City was due backward to showcase the true potential of this world. There had to be other cities with higher-level cracks and stronger supernatural branches. Some could provide him with more opportunities to gain experience points and other interesting corpses, while others could offer better security, even if their protection was meant for the general public rather than him or his family. At the very least, there had to be cities better than Woodstone. Chapter 156. Only thing needed. Then there was the possibility of making his family stronger. It might be difficult for Aunt Mia to step onto the supernatural path at her age, but Lily still had plenty of time. Even if she had terrible cultivation talent, just like Michael himself had before his awakening, with enough resources, she could be force-fed, drug-enhanced, and turned into a prodigy. Michael planned to make this a reality. There was no guarantee that anyone could awaken, or at least, no method Michael was currently aware of, but he firmly believed that with the right conditions, it was possible to forcefully push someone to the point of igniting a life seed. If the circumstances were ideal, it could work. As for the possibility that Aunt Meow might not be able to light a life seed, even with ample resources, several thoughts ran through Michael's mind. For one, since he wanted her to live a long life, he would have to find methods to prolong it. The idea that such things didn't exist never even crossed his mind. If demigods, beings more powerful than that mysterious figure in blue who had cleared the city's crisis in an instant, existed, and if supernaturals themselves could already live for extended periods, then Michael had every reason to believe that there were even greater resources out there in the universe, resources that could extend the lifespan of ordinary humans. Of course, they would likely be incredibly difficult to acquire. Then there was another idea he personally liked, reserving a contract slot for his family and filling it with powerful undead that could change their size. For now, though, these were just ideas. He had other matters to take care of first. A moment later, Michael reached for his phone and reread the message the association had sent him just before he entered the bathroom. Thanks to his efforts in preserving the building, the water system was still intact. The crisis in the city has calmed down, but supernaturals are still encouraged to remain cautious and stay aware of their surroundings. If you notice anything unusual that needs reporting or encounter a situation you can't handle, please reach out to us. Additionally, for the next 3 days, the association will be purchasing the corpses of defeated monsters at 3 times the market price as compensation for your service. More rewards are still being considered. Thank you all for your support. May the will of Aurora prevail for 1,000,000 years. Michael's gaze lingered on the last sentence. May the will of Aurora prevail for 1,000,000 years. Even now, he felt a strange sensation whenever he read those words. But after seeing them repeatedly, he was beginning to think they weren't just a simple motto. May the will of Aurora prevail for 1,000,000 years. Will of Aurora. Was that the key part of the phrase? Michael wasn't sure, nor did he dwell on it too much. But after seeing it again, right after noticing how the system panel addressed the bodies in his storage space, it made him pause and think just a little deeper. Michael skimmed through the first few paragraphs of the message, already familiar with most of the content. However, one particular section made him smile. For a moment, he could almost see millions grinning at him. For the next 3 days, the association will be purchasing the corpses of defeated monsters at 3 times the market price as compensation for your service. Michael couldn't even count how many corpses he and his undead had killed, but it was definitely in the thousands, perhaps close to 2,000 or even slightly above. And the best part, some of those corpses came from monsters in higher-level cracks, meaning even greater profits. No. Even if all the cracks had been low-level, tripling the standard price per corpse still made this an incredibly lucrative opportunity. Of course, stronger corpses from higher-level cracks would fetch even more, and Michael was more than happy with his haul. This method is actually quite good. It ensures the association directly compensates those who truly fought, rather than mistakenly rewarding some supernatural who just claims to have protected the public. Naturally, there were still plenty of loopholes that could be exploited depending on how the association handled things. But overall, Michael saw this as a decent way to address the issue of rewarding supernaturals. The fact that additional rewards might still be given later on made him feel slightly less resentful toward the Federation. Only slightly. However, in the end, if the benefits were good enough, even a terrible parent could be loved. Feeling refreshed, Michael exchanged a few words with his family before heading out of his apartment. His goal? To retrieve the corpses he had accumulated outside the community. Even mosquito meat is still meat, and I happen to like meat. With the help of 2 strong undead orcs, Michael got to work again, though the process ended up dirtying his fresh outfit once more. Hours passed, and most people had begun to accept and adapt to the situation. In fact, some, especially teenagers, were already back on their phones. However, they weren't scrolling through reels or watching entertainment. Everything they were doing was still related to the crisis. After reconnecting with the outside world, the residents of Woodstone City discovered that the situation was far more serious than they had initially thought. Their city hadn't been the only one that had gone through an apocalyptic event. Supernaturals within Woodstone City, along with its general populace, soon learned the shocking truth. 20 cities across Aurora had suffered the same catastrophe. One thought ran through the minds of most people. What was happening in the Federation? Unfortunately, no officials had come forward to address the situation. Instead, the world was left to rely on the words, thoughts, and speculations of various news channels, local networks being the most prominent, as well as commentary from celebrities. Michael only learned about this after accidentally eavesdropping on a conversation. The news shocked him, but he quickly calmed himself. At the end of the day, whether it was in the land of origin or the real world, he needed one thing: strength. To put it simply, strength was almost everything. No, strength was everything. Chapter 157 Happy Family. Absorbed in their tasks. A few hours unknowingly passed. Before Michael realized it, more people had already entered his community. Some were survivors from other areas, assessing the city's damage. Others were workers sent to wash the blood off buildings and streets. And then there were the supernaturals, freely using their powers in broad daylight under the watchful eyes of ordinary people. Well, Michael himself had used his powers more than once during this time. It suddenly felt like the hidden society the Federation had worked so hard to build for the supernatural world had collapsed in an instant. Now, the world was more aware of the supernatural than ever before. Michael frowned as a few cameras flashed past him. Some belonged to local news crews, while others were just regular people taking photos and videos with their phones. Regardless of their identity, their goal was the same: to share what they had captured. However, it wasn't Michael they were focused on. Their attention was on his undead. Michael, who had been unable to send them back to the netherworld before the camera harassment began, had no choice but to call them his summons whenever questioned. Fortunately, his two largest undead, Lucky and Prince, hadn't been seen by the public. Otherwise, he would have faced even more questions. For a brief moment, Michael felt he understood what celebrities went through. The worst part, he wasn't even in a crowd. Unfortunately, he still couldn't dismiss his undead. They still had work to do, helping him load his claimed corpses into the hover trucks belonging to the Supernatural Association. It was Michael's first time seeing one in person. With a staff member handling communication and negotiations, Michael, who wasn't interested in haggling, established a pleasant relationship with him. The man even used his connections to prioritize transporting Michael's loot ahead of others. Because of this, Michael missed the opportunity to return to the land of origin and fill his open contract slots before the daily evolution point refresh. In the end, he still gained 40 evolution points, bringing his total to 71. If he chose to accumulate and save his points, he could evolve one of his undead into a 1-star extraordinary creature. But that was something to consider later. For now, Michael happily sent off the association staff and checked his account balance. $15,354,526. He was rich again. Wait, that wasn't right. He still had the million before the transaction. So technically, he had already been rich. Michael felt conflicted. The moment he got his hands on something he really needed, he knew he'd be back to his broke days in no time. Shaking his head, he glanced around once more, conveniently ignoring the cameras pointed at him. Just as he was about to head back to his apartment, something caught his eye. Michael frowned. Some creeps were taking pictures of his clueless female orcs. Creeps. Under the astonished eyes of the public, Michael and his female orcs vanished into thin air, the latter because he had summoned them back to the netherworld, and the former because he had bolted straight for his apartment. Back at home, the scent of freshly cooked food filled the air. With his sharp hearing, Michael could pick up the whispers of his aunt and cousin. Thinking for a moment, a smile crept onto his face. No one knows what can happen, so. $15,354,526. Michael checked his account balance. To be honest, it should have been more, but the taxes had been insane. Very crazy. Michael conveniently ignored it, just like he had done for his previous big income. Apparently, taxes weren't a thing for any transaction under 10 million if related to the association, but once you went over that, it seemed like you also paid for unknown, old corpses due. Soon, $14,354,526. With a mischievous smile, Michael wondered what his family's reaction would be when they found out what he had just done. However, he had barely stepped into his room when he heard a scream. Wait, no. 2 screams. Michael, I need some money, brother Michael. I'm too broke. Ha! Watching the two rush into his room, Michael burst out laughing. This was exactly what he wanted to see. Not perfect, but a happy and healthy family. In the end, after chasing down Aunt Mia, who once again thought he was sending too much, and Lily, who had somehow instantly recovered from her depression and started listing everything they needed, Michael found himself exhausted. He still didn't understand why he needed to buy a bag of all things, but after all the fuss, he decided to take a short break. That short break quickly turned into deep sleep. By the time Michael woke up, it was already getting dark. The body is really amazing, Michael muttered in frustration. Discover more stories at my virtual library empire. Despite his strength, he couldn't even control a little sleep, especially when he hadn't overexerted himself in the morning's battle. Whatever. I feel more refreshed now. As he stood up, he could sense his family and Undead's presence in the apartment, all moving around in the same area. Curious, he used share senses with his Undead to see what was happening. Immediately, Michael was taken aback. His Undead was cleaning. And not just cleaning, but doing it extremely well. Beginning's movements were trained, precise, a little unsettled, not because he disliked it, but because it was so unexpected. Michael cancelled share senses. With how much time Beginning has spent in the real world doing various tasks, it's probably one of my smart-ass Undead now, right? It seemed possible. But after a moment, Michael shook the thought away. Since he himself felt the need to refresh, he decided to do just that. As the water ran in the bathroom, several thoughts about what he was about to do next in the next few hours crossed his mind. But first, he wanted to talk to his family about moving out. He didn't think they'd refuse. Chapter 158. Lily. You want us to move? Aunt Mia repeated what Michael had just told her. She was about to instinctively refuse, questions like why forming in her mind, when she suddenly paused. Though she hadn't left the house, preferring to stay indoors, which seemed to satisfy Michael, she had still seen what lay outside. The view from their apartment windows, the news, and the internet all painted the same picture: chaos. In a way, this place no longer seemed livable. How would the supermarket function when it wasn't even in proper shape? How was Lily supposed to go to school? Though the holidays were approaching, from what Aunt Mia had seen, the city's restoration, if it even happened, would take months, if not longer. And even then, it was unlikely to return to how it was just yesterday. Thinking about it this way, moving out actually made sense. Michael watched his aunt deep in thought but didn't interrupt. If she had immediately spoken against his idea, it would have led to a debate. But her silence meant she was seriously considering it. Michael knew this much about her after years of living together. Of course, just because she was thinking it over didn't mean she had agreed. But that didn't change anything for him. If she objected, he was ready to switch into debate mode. To give his family a better life and ensure their safety, Michael didn't mind spending time, even half the night, convincing her. And he knew Aunt Mia well enough to expect that if she disagreed, she would argue her point logically, not just reject the idea outright. Fortunately, it didn't come to that. Her next words brought a smile to Michael's face. Maybe moving out really isn't a bad idea, she admitted before adding, but where would we even move to? Michael had an answer. There was no specific answer. I don't know yet. Aunt Mia gasped slightly at his response, but before she could comment, Michael spoke first. But I'll find one. Don't worry, Aunt Mia. What I have in mind is a place that can provide better security for you guys and more. By the time Michael finished speaking, a determined expression had taken over his face, and his aura grew serious. Aunt Mia's words caught in her throat. A moment later, she sighed. It was just as she thought. Her boy was growing up. Though he didn't say much, A part of her feared that maybe she and her daughter were holding him back. A part of her wanted to tell him that he didn't have to worry so much about them and should focus on himself. But she couldn't. She knew that as they grew, both Michael and even her own daughter would eventually go their separate ways. But she didn't want to be the one to push him away. She still wanted their presence. So, for now, she said nothing. In any case, I trust you. She trusted Michael. He had always been an intelligent and reliable boy. Michael's serious expression softened slightly at Aunt Mia's words. He didn't show it outwardly, but inside, he felt really good. Ignoring his cousin, who was hiding behind her bedroom door eavesdropping, Michael stood up from the sofa opposite Aunt Mia and spoke. I'll get it done, Ma. Just give me a little time. But in the meantime, we should start preparing. Also, for the next few days, use her for the house. As he spoke, Michael stretched out his hand. A greenish-black, summoning circle appeared in the center of the room, and a figure emerged from it. Aunt Mia let out a startled cry at the sudden appearance, but managed to calm herself quickly. Click! Squeak! The sound of a door opening followed. Lily burst out of her room, only to freeze in shock at the big sister now standing in the room. Aunt Mia shot an angry glare at Michael, who scratched his cheek in mild embarrassment. Though he had done something similar before, summoning that big guy to help clean the house. Back then, everything was happening too quickly. The chaos from the cracks had numbed their ability to react properly. Now that things were calmer, her reaction was only natural. However, the sudden appearance of the undead wasn't the only thing that surprised Aunt Mia. She's quite pretty. Can she speak? Aunt Mia asked hesitantly. According to her nephew, these strange beings were all his summons and were extremely strong. But this was the first time she had seen one that wasn't intimidating, if she ignored the height. Not yet. Michael replied in an odd tone. To be honest, he wasn't sure if his undead would ever be able to speak. But who knew what was possible in this world? He didn't deny the possibility. In fact, he even hoped that such a reality would one day manifest. Okay, go and rest. I'll use her. Aunt Mia felt a little odd saying this, as the being in front of her felt almost human, aside from the white eyes and gray skin. Michael nodded. He figured that since keeping his undead active seemed to gradually increase their intelligence, there was no harm in letting his aunt make better use of them when they were idle. In fact, all of his summonable undead were currently outside, still guarding the apartment building and the community. Seeing that everything was fine, Michael turned to head into his room, only for his cousin to call out to him just as he was about to enter. As for Lily, Michael's respect for her had only grown. Despite everything, she was still able to stay active. Even after learning the truth about her friend on the upstairs floor, when the officers came to arrest the animal responsible, she still tried her best not to sink into sadness. Michael didn't know what he could do for her, but he was glad she was holding on. What do you want? Michael asked, turning to look at his cousin. That big guy has a name, right? Beginning, I believe. Enjoy more content from my virtual library empire, yes. What's her name? Lily asked, gesturing toward the female ORC in the sitting room. Michael paused for a moment before a wide smile appeared on his face. Lily. Her name is Lily. Chapter 159 Races. Thinking about what happened a few seconds ago made Michael smile again. Finally, his bad joke actually became a good one for him. Aunt Mia's twitching eyelids at the revelation only made it better. After having fun, Michael calmed himself down and turned to the best issue at hand. The Land of Origin. Before the event with the demonic cultivators, Michael, who had just discovered civilization, wanted to head there after performing several rounds of undead summoning on his undead. From then, he would decide whether or not to evolve the ones the skill had successfully affected. Commander Necromancer, Specialist Necromancer, and Horde Necromancer. Michael identified himself as the last one since the more undead he had, the more beneficial it was for him, literally. But he also knew that due to his talent, he could be whatever necromancer type he wanted. Commander necromancers focused on commanding a smaller group of high-tier undead, valuing the strength and potential of each individual. This path prioritized quality over quantity. Their weakness was their limited numbers, and their strength was their high-quality undead. Though they would eventually have more summons as they leveled up, in a power-matched event, they would only have a few undead to use. However, this was of little concern to Michael. With his talent, he did not need to focus on specific undead for certain situations. All his undead could potentially be excellent at all times. This meant that Michael could not only be a commander necromancer, but he could also be a horde necromancer at the same time, creating a rare hybrid. It could even extend to specialist necromancers, who focused on specific types of undead, such as mages, tanks, or assassins, to create powerful synergies within their forces. With his talent, Michael could do it all, as long as he had enough evolution points. That was the main requirement. And unfortunately, it wasn't easy to fulfill. I'll still check out that place I saw in the land of origin after I'm done with everything. It should still be nighttime, so it's only better. After making his decision, Michael had one last thing to do. Undead summoning. Following the appearance of a magic circle, a towering ORC shaman emerged from it. It was the female ORC that could manipulate water. Perhaps it was because of the recent chaos. But Michael did not feel safe leaving his body exposed in the real world when his consciousness was in the land of origin. Even Lily, whom he had summoned, had been given a command to obey his aunt, and to protect the apartment and the people in it alongside beginning. The female ORC in front of Michael now was his personal protection for his real-life body while his consciousness was in the land of origin. Hopefully, her protection wouldn't be needed in the end. Relaxed and calm, Michael laid on his bed and connected his consciousness with his body in the land of origin. A moment later, in the dark night, a pair of green eyes opened. "I'm back," Michael muttered as he stretched his body. The fresh air of the forest rushed past his face immediately. Once again, Michael felt that limitless sensation of extreme freedom he always seemed to have in the land of origin. With his senses spread out, he felt the presence of his other undead and walked out of the cave, where he was met with corpses. They belonged to the ones he had killed from the cracks, which he planned to revive soon. There were some pretty interesting ones Michael was very optimistic about, and he looked forward to adding them to his undead army. But for now, he had something else in mind to focus on, even if there was a griffin corpse not too far away. Before doing anything else, Michael released Lucky and Prince from the netherworld and had them stay around his cave dwelling. Then, he used share senses on multiple undead to get a better understanding of his surroundings. Fortunately, nothing had changed much, aside from the smell coming off the corpses, which was still unable to mask the fresh, earthy scent of the forest, oddly blending at times. Of course, it could also mean that Michael's body, having stayed close to these corpses, whether there was a consciousness controlling it or not, had simply gotten used to the smell, as it was a living thing itself. After confirming that his surroundings were more or less the same as before he left and were safe, Michael excitedly brought something out from his storage space and placed it in front of him. It was yet another corpse. Continue your adventure at my virtual library empire, but different from the ones around him. It was the corpse of a human, one of his first. Michael was excited for so many reasons. At first, it had just been an extreme curiosity about what a human undead would look like and how it would evolve. Then, it became about what its evolution could be, seeing as it didn't have star ratings. Eventually, it turned into an experiment, one that could determine what he himself or any other person would be like if, by some chance, he could evolve such thing in the future. Talents worked in different ways. Some could be used beyond their common features, and some even evolved or advanced to say. It had only been a few days, and Michael barely knew anything about his talent. All he knew was that as long as something was connected to his soul, he could use it. So, was there a reason his body, being the container of his soul, wasn't part of the things he could evolve? And could his talent itself grow stronger than it already was? Michael didn't know the answer to any of these questions. For the latter, he figured it might be best to simply accumulate evolution points and see if a change would happen. However, all of that was for the future him to handle and figure out. For the current Michael, there was only one thing on his mind: a human knight apprentice. A human knight apprentice from the Aurora realm. It had no visible raise rank or star rating. The description that appeared when Michael used detect on a corpse for the first time was also quite interesting. Aurora realm. I wonder what the other realms look like. Is there an elven realm? A dragon realm filled with dragons? Heavens! I wonder how they look like. And Michael stopped himself from saying it aloud. But deep inside, he couldn't help but wonder, what would the evolution forms of races he hadn't even seen yet look like? Chapter 160 Disappearance. The thought was a little dark, since, due to his subconscious reasoning that only dead creatures could be evolved, he had imagined these races he hadn't even seen yet as corpses. Michael shook the thought out of his head and immediately used Undead Revival on the corpse in front of him. As a rank 1 Necromancer, far stronger than the corpse could ever be, it only took a single try to turn it into an undead. Fortunately, it worked on the first attempt. Nothing was ever guaranteed, of course, but his rank gave him a high success rate. This was also why Michael hadn't tried reviving the level 25 human mage corpse he had. Due to its strength, the chance of failure was much higher. Still, he was glad he had been able to find 4 more human corpses. It increased his chances of having at least one human undead. After the revival, Michael commanded the undead to stand up and examined its appearance. The rough-looking man now appeared much paler, his once lively eyes now completely white. But overall, he still looked very human. It made sense. He was originally a human, unlike Beginning and Lily, who were orcs evolved from goblins. After a quick glance at the undead human before him, Michael turned his focus to his main goal. However, the moment he checked his talent section to evolve the undead, he was stunned by what he saw. Explore hidden tales at my virtual library empire. I can't evolve it. Michael frowned. He had expected something unusual to happen, considering there were no star ratings or other indicators, but he had assumed it would just cost more evolution points. Yet instead, he was met with insufficient evolution points. 71 evolution points aren't enough to evolve it. Then how many do I need? Michael didn't believe it was simply because humans were an inherently formidable race. At least, he had never thought of himself as formidable before awakening, and the undead in front of him didn't seem any stronger than he had been back then. Still, he wasn't one to jump to conclusions. Michael proceeded to revive the other 3 human corpses, only to end up in the same situation. Unless he wanted to assume that all 4 just happened to be special cases, it had to be because of their race. But even then, he didn't believe this was because humans were uniquely powerful. There had to be another explanation, something similar to how evolving through stars and ranks required 5 times the previous amount of evolution points. In the end, there was nothing he could do for now. Michael decided to wait and accumulate more evolution points to see if anything changed. Yes, he was willing to be patient, at least until he had enough to evolve an extraordinary creature. If he still couldn't evolve his human undead then, he would just evolve Prince instead, pushing the beast not only to its peak but beyond it, into a higher rank altogether. 2 days at most, and I'll have my answer. At level 20 from level 15, Michael had gained 10 open slots for contracts. Now, having used 4, he only had 6 left. One was reserved for the Griffin, and another for the undead human Mage. The remaining 4 would be divided among other undead materials he had in mind. For one, he wanted to reserve a spot for the sand scorpion and a long-armed monkey. That left only 2 more open slots, which he could use however he liked. Since he already had specific targets in mind, Michael immediately began attempting to contract them with the limited corpses he had at hand. Of course, he didn't start with the difficult ones, the Griffin and the human Mage, due to their strength and the limited number of corpses, especially in the latter's case. If worst came to worst, he could try buying a few monster corpses from the association, but he wasn't sure if human corpses were something they even sold. Perhaps if they knew his class, they might consider it. Maybe they'd even be willing to sell one after some deliberation. But that was all speculation. If it were up to him, Michael didn't want to go to the association out of desperation. If he ever sought out the association for a corpse, it would be because he was simply trying his luck, not because he was forced to. He also didn't want to risk losing the almost rank to corpse he had. Michael had a strong suspicion that if he managed to turn that corpse into an undead, it would stay with him for a very, very long time. With these thoughts running through his head, Michael turned his focus back to the corpses in front of him. Under the illumination of the bright full moon, shrouded by the dark of the night, he began his attempt at contracting a long-armed monkey and a sand scorpion. In the real world, Deputy Manager Leo and the branch manager sat with their hands on their heads, rubbing their foreheads as if trying to suppress a terrible headache. So, you're saying all the previous cracks in the entire city have disappeared? The branch manager asked again, his tone heavy with disbelief. Yes, Leo confirmed. The news came about 10 minutes ago. That's why I'm here now. The branch manager exhaled sharply. I suppose this should be expected. You rarely find different cracks side by side. There's no infinite spot for negative energy, after all. Even after appearing, negative energy isn't needed anymore. They just help speed up the regeneration process. He leaned back, his fingers tapping the desk. We have 3 level 5 cracks above this city now. If anything, he muttered, now that I think about it, it would actually be surprising if nothing happened to the previous cracks. Though he understood the reasoning, it didn't make him feel any better. These cracks, they were the livelihood of the Supers Association branches in the city. Their workers, their funding, and the trade of the materials extracted from the cracks. They all depended on them. And now, they were all gone. Damn those bastards, Deputy Manager Leo muttered, his ever-composed demeanor cracking as he let out a rare curse.